It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Soft sunlight slipped through the fogged windows of Pineview Cafe, a place where the scent of fresh coffee clung to the air like a memory, and the clink of silverware played like a gentle lullaby between unspoken conversations. In that warm, familiar corner of town, Emma, a waitress with dark brown hair always neatly tied back, had been part of the cafe for over 5 years. But she wasn't just staff. She was its heartbeat. The kind of person who didn't just work in a place. She lived in its rhythm. She knew every quirk of her regulars. Mr. Brooks, who liked his toast just shy of golden. Mrs. Lucia, who preferred her tea untouched by lemon. Emma didn't need to ask before refilling a cup. She just knew. But beyond the cafe's glass doors, her own life had begun to crumble under quiet pressure. Her mother, a woman who had spent her life working until her hands ached, now struggled with a stack of medical bills too big for any insurance policy to cover, and Liam, her younger brother, was chasing a dream of college that felt like climbing a mountain in worn-out shoes. Every application was another cost they couldn't afford. Emma took every extra shift, stayed late, came early, and never said no when someone called out. But no matter how much she gave, it never seemed to stretch far enough. Still, each morning she tied on her apron, pulled her hair back, and whispered the same thing to herself. Kindness doesn't cost a thing. That afternoon, the doorbell gave a faint jingle as an older man stepped inside. He looked to be in his mid-50s. His coat was frayed at the cuffs, his shoes worn nearly flat against the floor. He moved quietly, head bowed, like someone used to being overlooked. Emma didn't ask questions. She simply walked over, holding a coffee pot with both grace and certainty. "Coffee?" she offered, her voice warm, steady, laced with a compassion that didn't need permission. The man nodded slowly, then fumbled with his wallet. A few loose coins tumbled into his hand, barely enough for a breath of warmth, let alone a full cup. From across the cafe, Rick Carter, the manager, narrowed his eyes. His voice cut through the moment like ice. "If he can't pay, he can't stay." Emma froze. She looked down at the coins, then up at the man's weathered face. Her chest tightened, not from pity, but something deeper. Recognition? Empathy? She saw her mother's fatigue in his eyes. She saw Liam's quiet desperation. She saw herself. Without a word, she poured the coffee, a full cup, hot, placed it in front of him, and leaned in just slightly. "It's on me," she said gently. The man blinked in disbelief. His eyes welled as he wrapped his hands around the ceramic like it was a lifeline. "Thank you," he whispered, voice barely audible. Emma just smiled, but from across the room, Carter's face had already darkened, his jaw clenched like thunder gathering on the horizon. The man finished his drink slowly, as if trying to prolong the warmth just a little longer. Then he stood, nodded gratefully, and left without another word, leaving behind the quiet weight of a simple act that had touched something far beyond the cup. And that's when Carter erupted. He stormed across the room, his voice rising sharply. "You don't get to give away food here. Who do you think you are? The owner?" He didn't wait for an answer. "You're fired." Everything stopped. One of the cooks peeked out from the kitchen. A spoon clattered onto a plate. Conversations dropped into silence. But Emma didn't flinch. She slowly untied her apron, folded it with care, and placed it neatly on the counter. No begging. No excuses. Just a calm, quiet strength in her voice. "Someday, I hope you understand. Kindness is worth more than profit." And with that, she turned and walked out. And then she left, back straight, head held high. Outside, the wind tugged at the worn edges of her old coat. She had no job lined up, no plan, no promises. The road ahead looked uncertain, almost invisible, and yet, somehow she felt lighter. Not in her body, but in her spirit. as if letting go of something heavy, something silent, had made room for something else, something right. Inside the cafe, Carter muttered under his breath, clinging to a brittle sense of authority. "Rules are rules," he said to no one in particular. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the man Emma had just helped wasn't a homeless drifter. He wasn't a nobody. He was someone who owned everything Carter stood on. Jackson Reeves, founder and CEO of the very company Carter represented, had watched the entire scene unfold. And within 24 hours, everything would change, from the top down. The next morning, the first wind of dawn crept down the narrow streets of Elmbridge, carrying with it the scent of pine from the nearby woods and a trace of baked bread from the corner bakery next to Pine View Cafe. Everything looked the same: the trees, the pavement, the hum of a waking town. But for Jackson Reeves, nothing felt the same. He had barely slept. The events of the previous day played on a loop in his mind. The quiet dignity of the waitress, the cold arrogance of the manager, and the moment a cup of coffee revealed the moral health of a place he thought he knew. Jackson hadn't walked into Pine View Cafe for caffeine. He came to see with his own eyes what numbers and charts could never tell him. Pine View was just one of 74 cafes under the umbrella of his hospitality group, a company he had built over 2 decades, not from a boardroom, but from kitchens and mop buckets, dish pits and coffee stations. But recently complaints had begun to stack up, not about food or service, not directly, but about tone, about fear, about something harder to quantify: the erosion of trust. He remembered his mother that night, a tiny woman with tired eyes who had once worked 3 jobs to keep the family from losing their home. She didn't have much, but still found ways to bring sandwiches to the local shelter every Sunday. "When you don't have much," she used to say, "you learn how big a small kindness really is." Emma reminded him of her. She didn't hesitate, didn't whisper. It didn't look over her shoulder. She gave that coffee like it was nothing, because to her, it was natural. And in that act, she exposed something far uglier than poor management. She exposed the rot of fear-based leadership. If someone like Carter could fire someone like Emma over a cup of coffee, how many other Emmas had been quietly punished, their kindness stomped out in silence? Jackson wasn't angry, not exactly. What he felt was disappointment, deeper, colder, and far more resolute. Disappointment, he'd learned, was what came when someone you trusted didn't just fail, but failed in ways that reflected on you. So he acted. He called his executive assistant, the only person who knew to keep things off the books when it really mattered. "Find Emma Callahan," he said. "I want to speak to her, in person. No press, no cameras, just her and me." Then he requested Carter's complete file: performance reviews, staff turnover stats, customer feedback logs, and every internal complaint. One anonymous report from 4 months ago jumped out immediately, detailing how Carter had been pocketing pooled tips, manipulating schedules to punish part-timers, rewarding favoritism, and threatening termination for anyone who questioned him. The report had been quietly closed. Why? Because on paper Carter's numbers looked clean. Labor was low, revenue steady. But numbers don't tell the truth, people do. Jackson leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. Something told him Emma had been the one to file that report, and now she'd paid for her courage. What happened yesterday hadn't been about coffee, it had been retaliation. And today it was time to flip the script. At exactly 8:00 IEM, Jackson returned to Pine View Cafe, but this time he didn't wear his old coat or scuffed shoes. He stepped out of a sleek black sedan in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, his silver hair combed back, his steps measured and firm. The sidewalk beneath him felt different now, not foreign, not passive, but his, as if he were reclaiming territory that had slipped too far from his reach for too long. It was time to remind people not just who he was, but what he stood for. Inside the cafe, Carter barked orders at a new hire about wiping down tables and replacing expired ketchup bottles. He was in motion, trying to control every inch of the space, until he looked up, and then everything stopped. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Carter's breath caught in his throat. Jackson Reeves had just walked through the door. Their eyes met. Calm, piercing, deliberate. Jackson's gaze was as sharp as a blade. He didn't need to announce who he was. He didn't need a name tag or title. Carter already knew. He knew something bigger than him had just walked in, and this time, he wasn't the one doing the judging. Jackson offered a slight smile, just enough to still the entire room. Then he stepped forward, not hurriedly, but with the quiet authority of someone returning to a place he owned. Because he did. Carter stood frozen, the clipboard still gripped in his hand like a shield. Just yesterday he had shouted at this man, unaware of who he truly was. Gone was the worn coat and tired expression. Before him now stood a man in a tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, polished leather shoes glinting in the morning light. Same face, different presence, commanding, experienced, coldly composed. Jackson didn't rush. He scanned the cafe slowly, like collecting remnants of something once personal. Every crack in the tile, every stain on the floor, every flicker of wary eyes peeking through the kitchen door, it was all still here. But the air had changed. It was thicker now, filled with tension, like the moment before a storm breaks. Carter stepped forward, forcing a nervous smile, trying to reclaim some control. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, voice shaking slightly. Jackson didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate. Finally, he said, evenly, "I think it's the other way around." Carter blinked. I'm sorry. What do you mean?" Jackson tilted his head slightly, letting a ray of sunlight catch the lapel of his jacket. A small gold pin shimmered. The insignia of the company, one Carter had only seen at the bottom of corporate memos. The color drained from Carter's face. "You're with corporate?" he choked out. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "That's one way to put it." A murmur spread from the kitchen. The employee Carter had berated that morning stood motionless in the corner, wide-eyed. Others leaned in silently. No one said a word, but the mood shifted. Everyone felt it. The balance had changed. Jackson stepped closer. "My name is Jackson Reeves. I'm the founder and current CEO of Willow Creek Hospitality, the company that owns Pineview Cafe." Silence. Dense and absolute. Carter opened his mouth, then closed it. He tried again. "Mr. Reeves, if I had known you were coming today, you'd have worn a cleaner shirt, smiled more, and told everyone to pretend everything was fine," Jackson interrupted, his tone cool but razor sharp. "But I didn't come here for a performance." He took one more step, his presence enough to make Carter involuntarily step back. "I came to see how my employees are treated when no one's watching." Carter looked down, struggling to maintain composure. "It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Jackson repeated, tilting his head slightly. "I saw a waitress serve an elderly man a cup of coffee. Then I saw her get fired, right there, in front of a room full of customers." Carter stiffened. "She gave away product without approval?" "He showed compassion," Jackson countered. "You showed control." Now. More employees emerged from the back, drawn by the gravity of what was happening. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Their eyes said enough. Hope, fear, vindication. Jackson's voice lowered but grew firmer. And this isn't the first time, is it? That complaint from 4 months ago about you skimming tips, cutting hours for part-timers, slashing bonuses for senior staff? You thought it got buried, but I found it. He reached into his coat and pulled out a slim folder, placing it firmly on the counter. Payroll audits, staff testimonies, internal memos, it's all here. And the only person brave enough to file that report was Emma. The cafe went still. Carter paled. Jackson didn't blink. She gave you a chance to do better. Then this week she gave a stranger a cup of coffee. Both times you punished her, not because of company policy, but because you can't stand being challenged. Carter opened his mouth to defend himself, but Jackson raised a hand. Don't, he said calmly. I came here to see firsthand the toxic culture you've created, and it ends today. He turned to face the entire room. As of this moment, Rick Carter is relieved of his position as manager of Pineview Cafe, effective immediately. A collective breath passed through the cafe, then stillness, then something close to release. Carter trembled. You're making a mistake. No, Jackson replied calmly. I'm not making a mistake. I'm correcting one. He turned to leave, hand reaching for the door, but he paused. Turning back, he met Carter's eyes one last time. His voice was low but unshakably firm. The only thing worse than breaking trust is believing you'll never be caught. With that, he stepped outside. The wind swept through the streets of Elmbridge, cold and clear, but inside Pineview Cafe, for the first time in months, warmth returned, not from the coffee or the lights, but from something deeper. The staff looked at one another, not with fear, but with relief. A quiet beginning had been born. And somewhere else in the city, a woman who thought she'd lost everything was about to hear a knock at the door, a knock that would change her life. Emma Callahan sat alone by the window of her small apartment, cradling a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The late afternoon sun cast a soft orange glow over the chipped wood of the table. A stack of unopened bills sat to her side. Not just mail, but the weight of everything she'd been avoiding. She hadn't told her mother she'd lost the job. Not yet, not while the hospital still sent invoices and her younger brother Liam sat day after day waiting for college acceptance letters that felt more like distant dreams than real hope. All day long she'd replayed it in her mind, the coffee, Carter's cold stare, the stunned silence of the diners, and that last line, "You're fired." She didn't regret what she did, but after 5 years of loyalty, it still stung. The silence that followed her dismissal felt like a slap colder than the winter wind outside. Then, a knock at the door. Light, unexpected. Emma froze. No one ever came by at this hour. She opened it slowly, and the man standing on the other side made her world stop. It was him. The man from yesterday, but not the same man. Gone was the worn coat and scuffed shoes. In his place stood a gentleman, polished leather shoes, a tailored suit, a kind expression that radiated warmth. "Emma?" he asked gently. She could only nod. "I'm Jackson Reeves, CEO of Willow Creek Hospitality. We own Pineview Cafe." Emma stood in shock, too stunned to respond. Hurried. I don't understand," she whispered. "I was the man you gave that cup of coffee to," Jackson said softly, his gaze meeting hers with sincerity. "The man Carter fired you for helping." Her eyes widened, lips parting in disbelief. "That was you?" He nodded slowly. "Sometimes I visit our locations undercover to see how our people are treated when no one's watching. I wasn't looking for anything special, just observing." Emma stepped aside, inviting him in with a silent motion. The apartment was small, worn but clean, and full of quiet pressure. Bills piled on the table, afternoon shadows creeping across old wood floors. Jackson took a seat across from her, careful not to disturb the delicate stack of unpaid truths between them. "You didn't know who I was," he continued, his tone gentle, like speaking to someone he already respected. "You had no reason to help me, but you did. And that tells me everything I need to know about you. More than any resume ever could." Emma looked down, her hands tightening around the mug. "I didn't do it for anything," she said quietly. "You just looked like someone who needed a little kindness." Jackson smiled, nodding slowly. "Exactly." He reached into his coat, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it on the table. "This," he said, "is your job offer." Emma's heart skipped. Her eyes darted to the envelope. "Not just your old job back," he added. "A new role, one that matters more. We want you to oversee service culture across 3 of our cafes in the region." She could barely breathe. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. Inside was a formal offer. A new title, a salary that felt like fiction. But it wasn't over. Jackson reached into his coat again and placed a second envelope beside the first. "This," he said, "is to fully cover your mother's medical bills, no strings attached." Emma covered her mouth, tears instantly welling, but he wasn't done. "And one more thing," he added. "Liam, your brother, he's applying to colleges, right?" Emma nodded slowly, speechless. "We've established a scholarship in your name. Full coverage. First year. He's got a shot now." The tears came harder, one drop, then another. Lee whispered, "Why would you do all of this?" Jackson leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to something close to reverence. "Because you didn't just serve coffee. You served humanity. You reminded me what this business, this whole industry is really about. Not profit margins or spreadsheets, but dignity, people." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Looking back at her, his eyes were soft, but sure. "Thank you for not staying silent, for standing up when it mattered most." Emma watched him disappear down the hallway. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel lost between broken decisions and uncertain roads. She felt seen, valued. The silence that filled her small apartment no longer pressed down like a burden. This time, it felt like the beginning of something beautiful. At the same moment, at Pineview Cafe, a new sign was being hung up in the exact spot where Emma once stood behind the counter. In bold, graceful letters, it read, "Here, kindness is served." It had only been 2 days since Carter was dismissed, yet the atmosphere felt entirely different. The tension and unease that once clung to the staff had begun to dissipate. No one tiptoed around the cafe anymore. And this morning, the aroma of coffee didn't just smell rich, it carried a subtle scent of relief and renewal. At precisely 8:03 a.m., the door chimed. Heads snapped up in unison. In walked Emma Callahan, still wearing her familiar denim jacket and carrying her loyal canvas tote. But everything about her posture, her gaze, and her quiet confidence revealed a woman fundamentally changed by the storm she had weathered. The young server, who just days ago trembled under Carter's harsh words, paused mid-step and whispered, "She's back." Emma offered a small, radiant smile. "Morning," she greeted. The cafe fell silent for a heartbeat. Then Miguel, the veteran cook, stepped out from the kitchen. He gently wiped his hands on his apron, looked Emma squarely in the eyes, and said warmly, "It's good to have you back." The whole cafe exhaled, not with applause but with laughter, quiet, genuine, and whole. Emma moved behind the counter without being told. This wasn't another shift. It was the start of a new mission, not managing profit margins, but tending to the heart and soul of the place. One person, one gesture at a time. In the back office, papers were still scattered, the remnants of Carter's abrupt exit. Emma didn't clear everything out, but she did one important thing. She carefully removed the handwritten sign reading "No excuses, no exceptions," folded it, and fed it into the shredder. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out the fresh plaque Jackson had personally given her yesterday. "Lead with respect, serve with heart." She pinned it to the wall above the desk. Just an hour later, an elderly man shuffled in, his shoulders stooped, his expression sheepish. Emma approached, offering a warm welcome. "Coffee for you?" He nodded quietly. "If it's not too much trouble," he murmured. Emma looked into his eyes and smiled. "It's never too much to be kind." She poured him a steaming cup. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and said softly, "This place, it feels different." Emma nodded gently. "That's exactly what we're aiming for." Miguel leaned over to the dishwasher, a grin tugging at his lips. "Told you she'd come back." The dishwasher chuckled, shaking his head in agreement. "She didn't just come back. She changed everything." At midday, Jackson returned, this time in a simple shirt and jeans, no flashy car or tailored suit in sight. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. He simply wanted to bear witness. His presence alone changed how people stood. More upright, more courageous. No introductions. Just a man who walked in and quietly commanded respect. He sat in the corner booth and ordered as usual, a black coffee. Emma personally brought it, smiling softly. "On the house." He smirked. "Are you sure? I hear that can get someone fired." They shared a laugh, but beneath it flowed an unspoken bond, mutual respect born from compromise, courage, and truth. As Emma began to walk away, Jackson interrupted. "I saw the new sign in the back office." She turned, hopeful. "Do you like it?" "I love it," he said. "But I want to add one more thing." He reached into his bag and presented a small wooden plaque, letters glinting in gold. "Presented to Emma Callahan for reminding us what true service means." Emma's eyes glistened, tears pooling. She looked down to hide them. "Thank you," she whispered. Jackson shook his head gently. "No, thank you." No fanfare, no cameras. He left quietly. Emma stood for a moment, plaque in hand, and then carefully placed it on the wall beside the register and taped below it a handwritten note. "No act of kindness is ever wasted." The door chimed again. A new customer. A new cup. Another chance to do things differently. Pineview Cafe had changed, and Emma, she was just getting started. One morning, as Emma was wiping down the cafe windowsill, she noticed a small sign posted just outside. She hadn't put it there. It read simply, "Kindness is served here." She smiled, recognizing the phrase. It was exactly what Jackson had told her the day he handed her the first plaque. And now it wasn't just a saying. It had become part of the cafe's identity. But it didn't stop there. Other branches of Pineview Cafe began requesting the same sign. Some framed it, hung it beside menus. Others placed it near their entrance like a badge of pride. By the end of the month, Jackson made it official, a company wasteful initiative titled the Kindness Program, honoring employees who showed compassion in small but meaningful ways. The first honoree, Emma Callahan. She didn't attend the recognition ceremony. She was at Pineview teaching a new employee how to operate the register. When someone asked why she wasn't at headquarters, she just shrugged. Because the real work is here. That afternoon, Jackson dropped by again, not for an inspection, just to sit. He settled into his usual corner. Emma brought him his coffee, still free. They spoke for a few minutes, then sat in peaceful silence. The kind of silence that doesn't weigh you down but lifts you up. Before leaving, Jackson turned to her. "Do you still believe kindness costs nothing?" Emma paused, then shook her head gently. No. It does cost something. Time, patience, sometimes even a job. But what it gives back is always worth far more. Jackson nodded, pleased. It's good answer. He glanced at the sign on the wall. You know, you started something. Emma smiled, eyes soft. I didn't mean to. That's exactly why it means so much. He turned and walked out, just as an elderly woman stepped in. Worn coat, tired eyes. Emma welcomed her as if she'd been expected. Good morning, can I offer you something warm? The woman hesitated, then nodded. Waited, a cup of coffee, if it's not too much trouble. Emma poured a fresh steaming mug, setting it on the counter with a smile as gentle as morning sunlight. It's never any trouble. There were no cameras, no announcements, just a quiet gesture, just kindness. Behind her, sunlight hit the old wooden plaque on the wall. No act of kindness is ever wasted. Outside, the wind danced through the trees, rustling young leaves. Inside, Pineview Cafe, once just another coffee shop, had become something more. Proof that the smallest acts, when done with heart, can echo louder than grand gestures. And kindness, at last, had found its home. 3 months passed. Pineview still looked the same, cracked leather boots, a ceiling fan that squeaked, the door chimes still slightly off-key, but the energy inside, brighter, warmer, whole. Emma's plaque remained by the register. Customers often paused to read it. Some took pictures. Others simply smiled, like they'd stumbled across something that made the world feel a little lighter. Emma had just finished wiping down table 6 when a young voice spoke from the counter. Miss Callahan? A young man stood there, around 19, thin frame, clean but faded clothes, shoes too worn for the cold. His posture was polite but guarded, the stance of someone too familiar with rejection. Sorry to bother you, he said nervously. Someone told me I might find help here. Emma walked over slowly, her steps steady, the way she always approached pain, with quiet care. Are you okay? She asked. He nodded, then hesitated. I've been looking for work. I don't have a place to stay right now. Someone at this shelter said you've helped people before. I can pay, I just need something warm today. Emma didn't ask for ID, didn't ask for proof. She looked at him the way she once looked at Jackson, not with suspicion, but with understanding. Coffee? She asked, softly. His shoulders relaxed, as if a weight fell away. Yes, please. She poured him a cup, then added a warm breakfast sandwich to the plate. He looked at it, then up at her. I didn't order this. Emma smiled gently. You didn't have to. From a nearby booth, an older couple watched quietly. They exchanged a glance, then quietly paid for the boy's meal before slipping out. No words, no acknowledgement. That's just how it worked now. Kindness passed from one to another, no announcement required. Later that afternoon, Jackson returned again. He had already visited the other 2 cafes in the region, but Pineview was always last, the only one he came to without an assistant, without a calendar, only himself. This time, he brought a new employee, a young woman, hesitant and skeptical. She'd heard stories, but hadn't believed them. Emma greeted her with a warm cup of tea and a smile that made you feel like you belonged. She led her on a quiet tour through the cafe, and when they reached the plaque, the girl paused, eyes wide. You're her? She asked quietly. Emma shrugged, a smile tugging at her lips. It was just a cup of coffee. No. It was more than that. Jackson stood nearby, silent but deeply moved. Pride swelled in his chest, quiet yet unmistakable. Emma had become the person he once spoke about in training seminars, not as a theoretical case study on a PowerPoint slide, but as someone real, a person who didn't just talk about values. She lived them. She touched hearts not with policy, but with action. Later that evening, after the cafe had closed and the chairs were stacked, Emma stepped outside to lock the front door. The air was cool, the breeze soft. She looked up at the new sign Jackson had approved just last week. "Welcome in. No judgment, just coffee." She turned the key, then paused, glancing through the glass at the now empty tables. That space, that simple, modest room, had once broken her. She had been dismissed there, forgotten, overlooked. But it was also where she had been believed, supported, and allowed to become who she truly was. She was no longer just a server. She was a guide, a builder, a living reminder of the quiet power of human decency. Back home, her mother continued receiving treatment, fully funded by Jackson's scholarship fund. Liam, her younger brother, had just opened the acceptance letter from his dream university, and Pine View Cafe, once just another stop on a sleepy town street, had become something more. A sanctuary, a spark, a beginning. All of it born from one simple moment, one quiet gesture, one cup of coffee. Emma looked out onto the street. People walked by without knowing her story. They didn't know about the words etched inside or the lives changed under that roof. But inside those walls, every grateful glance, every silent thank you was living proof that the world could shift. Not with force, not with fear, but with kindness. Steady, subtle, unshakable. She stepped back inside. A new hire was folding napkins with quiet care, lost in the rhythm of the task. On the counter, someone had left behind a small note, handwritten and folded neatly. "Thank you for proving kindness still exists." And Jackson had been right. Kindness doesn't stop with the one who starts it. It carries forward, healing, inspiring, revealing. It helps those who've gone unseen to feel visible once again. Because sometimes, all it takes is a cup of coffee given to the right person at the right moment in the right place to change everything. A life, a company, or maybe, just maybe, the way the world chooses to treat one another.